All right, everyone, if you could take your seats, I think we're going to get started. You are here for the session Engaging the Community is More Than a Public Hearing. You are in the right place. My name is Sophie Glovier. I'm the Chief of Operations at the Watershed Institute, and I will be your moderator for this session. I want to start by thanking all of our sponsors once more. In terms of housekeeping, I think the in-person attendees are already familiar with these instructions, but please silence your devices. And when you're going to ask a question, speak loudly and clearly. I will be repeating the questions that we'll have at the end of the panel so that the people in the Zoom world can hear. And for those of you in the Zoom world, if you could use the Q&A function to ask your questions, we will be monitoring that. This program is being recorded and will be provided in the conference app. It is my great pleasure to introduce 4 speakers for this panel, particularly because of the emphasis that was placed at the plenary session this morning on getting the community engaged. And if you want to get the community engaged, these are your experts to help you do it. We have here Dana Patterson, Director of Marketing and Communication at Princeton Hydro, Kendra McCoy, our Community Engagement Manager at the Watershed Institute, Lee Clark, Program Manager at New Jersey Future, and Lucia Middleton, Community Water Advocate, also at the Watershed Institute. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kendra.
Will you let me go back? Great. I'm going to start this off by saying I'm going to move a little fast. I like questions, and you'll have the slides after. I just wanted to reiterate that. So, MS4 in your community, finding and then reaching your people. So let's review some of the new aspects of the permit. First, some of the unchanged things. So there's still that local public education and outreach requirement that remains. One of the big new changes is you need a salt storage ordinance and a tree protection ordinance. And then another large change is the incorporation of a watershed improvement plan that has multiple stages over the course of 5 years. During all of this, public outreach will only make your job easier as you go forward. The benefit will snowball. And I got to put a shout out that the modified requirement is that there needs to be a dedicated stormwater page on the municipal website. It has a whole list of things that has to include. Go see the permit itself. So the big thing about reaching your community is what got you here is not going to get you there. Your methods of reaching people have to change by the very nature because you've missed them the first time. So something has to be adjusted. My first tip, go where the people are. Just because you announce a meeting, put it in the paper, it doesn't mean they're going to come to you. So do your best to try to tag on to other community events, tag on with other departments as they're doing things in Parks and Rec or the school groups. I would say utilize existing groups in your community. I've heard of church groups doing environmental stewardship as a religious responsibility. Also, neighborhood and homeowner associations, they have an interest in flooding because it's going to hit their homes if they're not aware enough. And also, don't forget those outdoor recreation groups. I was surprised when I started doing my work in Trenton how important the skaters were in talking about flooding and stormwater. Because apparently, Trenton is like a skating destination hub because it's like so real. And one of the prime spots gets flooded quite regularly. So they've actually been really useful in getting us information. So think about those people that are outside in different spots because there's so much that has to be done spatially related to your WIP. Now, I mentioned schools a little bit, and I'm kind of bummed that this is happening at the same time as the other session that's about engaging students. But I advise you guys, try to connect back with your science teachers and connect to the curriculum. In another life, I was an informal science educator over at Liberty Science Center, so I worked a lot with the NGSS standards and the New Jersey Science Standards, which are the same thing effectively. And I took a big look through here, and there's many ways you can tie regional planning, natural disasters, human intervention, how water moves through a system to kindergarten all the way up to high school. So you got to think a little outside the box. Remember, you'll have these slides. There's plenty more. And I had to cut it. I had them just do one per grade. The other thing is you have to educate people because there's a problem that when people don't know something, they take a guess. They make the worst assumption possible and they carry it along. And if they don't get anything to correct that misconception, they'll think that they're not part of the problem at all. So I call this the guessing machine, which I think is the most popular appliance in America. So to address that, you have to, and this is really hard, correct misconceptions without repeating it. There's this really problematic human psychology thing that we tend to forget the explanation that debunked the myth, but we remember the myth and we go like, oh, I heard something about that. I guess it's true. There's also the fact that hearing something multiple times really sinks in. Studies have shown that it's when establishing like a group opinion, everyone thinks like this, it's almost as effective to have one person say the same thing 3 times as it is for 3 different people to say the same thing. It's one of the reasons for some things it feels like, oh, well, nobody believes in climate change. I hear this on this news and this on the other ones. It's like you hear things enough and you think it's the consensus. All right, tip 3, listening and really listening. Depending on your community, you might be talking with people that have gone through real tragedies due to floods. I remember after Hurricane Ida, I saw people that had their home washed into a creek. So you need to be prepared to listen and hear things that maybe you don't want to hear. You're going to hear some passionate people and you're going to hear some things that are off topic. But I found a lot of people are looking for an ear for a little bit and then they're receptive. So sometimes you got to take the hit, sometimes you just got to nod, but that's part of it. And you need to be listening in different ways. So it should take formal listening sessions, but also physical and digital surveys because some people have access to the technology, others don't. And you also want to try to incorporate geospatial tools to map some of these things because for your watershed inventory report, you need a map of many things. And I'm going to give you a bonus tip and I'm going to do a plug. Work with watershed associations. There's watershed associations across the state. Blue is us, red is the Rahway River Watershed Association, green is the Water Supply Authority, yellow is the Raritan Headwaters Association. I've included our river-friendly coordinator's contact information right there. You can contact her if you're interested in it, or you can also, if you say, well, I'm not in any of these regions, shoot me an email. I'll help you out. I guarantee there's somebody in your area that wants to help you be more environmentally friendly in your municipality. But river friendly is a great way to start. Another bonus tip, maybe get your residents involved with Streamwatch. It's something that's run across the state. I'm very proud of the Watershed Institute and what we've been able to do with our volunteers. And we've also expanded into Streamwatch schools. I've included my colleagues' information there. All of them are here today, but I've included Davis's picture so you can go find them. But what I want to say is that we have a lot of gaps in data, and the more we fill them in, the better the picture, the better we can understand the problem. You can't solve a problem you don't understand. All right, so I want to say thank you for everything. I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker. You will have these slides, and we'll be doing questions at the end.
Hi, everyone. Kendra did a great job getting into, the different ways of connecting with the public. And so now I'm going to be diving into those situations where New Jersey is a very diverse state. In fact, probably one of probably the top 3 most diverse state in the US. Don't quote me on that. But sometimes when you're doing outreach, you need to do it in a language that may not be English. Now, I acknowledge that there are dozens of other languages that are spoken in New Jersey, but being that the Hispanic/Latino population is one of the biggest minorities, and I myself am Spanish speaking, grew up speaking Spanish and English at home, this is what I will be focusing on for today. So at a glance, Latinos are the fastest growing ethnic group in the US, have been for a while. New Jersey specifically has seen its Latino population increase by almost 30% between the 2010 and 2020 censuses. And this is obviously an undercount because there are always people that are not going to be taken into account. And in addition, after English, Spanish is the second most commonly spoken language in the state, with over several million native speakers residing in the state alone. So at the highest level, so that being the state level, there is no law that requires New Jersey to translate government websites, public hearings, and documents into other languages. California has a law that addresses this. There have been talks recently about instating a law to address this, but it's not official yet. So because at the top, there's not a standard, this in turn has a trickle-down effect, which affects how NGOs and other nonprofits such as the Watershed Institute publish and share their information. So the good news is, especially with the increased diversity in the state, is that translation efforts among environmental and scientific organizations are on the rise. But once again, because there is no federal or there's no state level or state standard, the work produced tends to be quite inconsistent in quality due to many numerous factors, because this is a complex issue, but primarily due to a lack of free, credible resources. So even if an organization wants to translate, say, a legal document, they may have some financial barriers to being able to translate it correctly. B, proprietary resources not shared with external organizations. So one organization may, translate something beautifully or have some wonderful resources, but then not share with other organizations that might also need that info. And then C, organizations working in isolation from each other. And this, we all know this is not done on purpose. We just kind of, are trying to get through our day-to-day, and we can just sometimes forget that other people need this information too. Now I'm going to bring up a tragic example of what happens when proper communication strategies are not enforced. So in the most extreme of cases, this is not just a matter of people not being included or people not getting the information in time. Oftentimes, this can actually result in death. So this happened 10 years ago, but is very much still relevant today. A family of 7 Guatemalans took refuge in a storm drain because there was a tornado watch. What they didn't know was that there was also a flood warning. So as a result, the flood came in, filled up the storm drain, they drowned. So how did something like this happen? How could they have not known or heard that there would be something such as a flood? Well, this is from the same paper that talks about this story. So here, this chart is showing 2 radio stations broadcasting in Texas and Oklahoma. So these are all showing just the levels of danger in case of an extreme weather event. So you have like level 1 is like not really dangerous, and level 5 is like the most extreme level of danger. So as you can see here, levels 1 through 3, they use the words in Spanish, marginal, ligero, and ampliado. Station 2 uses, for the same level categories, mínimo, leve, and elevado. Now in English, these words, when you compare them to each other, mean marginal versus minimal, light versus slight, and extended versus elevated. Now we know in English, these words sound similar to each other, but we also know that they don't mean quite the same thing. And when you translate it into Spanish, and you have dozens of different Spanish dialects, this is like trying to communicate something to an Australian person and an Irish person. Okay, they both speak English, but we all know very different types of English, and it's even more so the case in Spanish. The other thing I want to point out here is that level 5 at the bottom is called elevado, but up there in Texas, but the same radio station, so it really shouldn't be different, but it is. That same word is used to describe a level 3 level of danger. So how are people supposed to know what's actually dangerous and what's not if you're using different words to describe different levels of danger? So there are ways to mitigate this. So one of the ways is, this is a translation expert. I quote it from the 80s, but it's still very relevant today. And he talks about the 7 steps that one should take to produce a high quality translation. So these steps will change depending on what type of translation you're doing. Obviously, a legal document will have different research required versus a scientific document. But so the steps include tuning, so situating the text and calculating how long it will take. Number 2, analysis. Number 3, understanding the context. Number 4, terminology. Number 5, restructuring. 6, checking, and 7, discussion. The last step is one that absolutely should not be glossed over. I think that is probably the single most important step when doing a translation. You always need to get a second set of eyes. So if you're an organization and you want to produce a translation, it is simply not enough to have one person doing the translation and then not have anyone else check their work. It doesn't matter how, in what facet you get it checked, but it should not be just one person, because especially if it's a piece of technical information, it needs to be checked. And that would be the case even if we were just publishing in English. So some factors to consider, even, before you get to the translation, in your town, depending on where you are, a city, what have you, is you need to know your demographics. So you need to know who lives in your town and where they're coming from. The second thing is where people get their news and other information. So as we know, everyone knows what WhatsApp is, but I would say in the US, it's not like the top form of communication. For Latinos, WhatsApp is one of the biggest modes of communication. In addition, Facebook and Telemundo, which is a broadcasting service. So understanding which tools that your target community are using, and then using those tools to get the information out to them is going to make your life much easier. And then the other things to consider is what the actual goal of translating this material is. So this will make it easier in the translation process when you're trying to make the decisions of what to emphasize and maybe what not to emphasize. And then that also leads into, general versus specialized language. So is the document for a highly educated audience, or is it just for the general public, which once again can be applied to any form of outreach. So this leads then into general best practices, which once again apply to just general community outreach, but are especially important when you're doing bilingual outreach. So the first thing, as I briefly mentioned, is gathering info about the demographics in your area. And this can be through surveys, this can be through census data, this can be through also other local organizations that often have more up-to-date data than your national census. The second thing is considering cultural relevance in addition to language accuracy. So the example I mentioned before about the Australian versus the Irish person, this is especially important. You need to know, it's not enough to know, well, we have Latinos in our town. Where are they from? Are they from the Caribbean? Are they from Central America? Are they from South America? Because those three regions, and I speak from experience, speak very different types of Spanish, especially when you're talking about very technical language that might not exist in certain sectors of the region. And then, of course, the next steps, collaboration and research into what is and isn't effective, collaborating with other local organizations that maybe don't do necessarily environmentally focused work, but still work very closely with the community will be just as valuable for your cause. And then the other thing, and this is something that needs to just be a part of your best practices, a permanent process, is constant assessment of the effectiveness and the impact of your bilingual outreach. So this needs to be done very periodically because, of course, immigration patterns shift, people move in and out. We've had a lot of, for example, like a high Venezuelan population coming into my town that wasn't present 15 years ago. So that's something that needs to be considered now that wasn't considered before 15 years ago. And so this is just an example of organizations that are progressing with general translation efforts. So this includes the National Weather Service, thank goodness, Research Institute of United States Spanish, DEP, and then other smaller organizations such as LALDEF based in Trenton. And that is all from me. Take it to the next.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you guys doing? Good? Awesome. My name is Dana Patterson-Greer. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Princeton Hydro. And I'm going to get a little bit more into the psychology and go a little bit deeper and then give you some tools before we get into Lee, who will talk about funding, which is always a fun topic to learn about. So before I start, I just want to get on the same page here. Public notification, public outreach, and stakeholder engagement are three different terms. They mean three different things. and they are used interchangeably all of the time. Public notification. You put a letter out, you put a newspaper ad out, this is happening. There's no public input. Public outreach. You have a couple of public meetings, you might answer some questions, take some comments into consideration, finalize whatever your policy report that you're doing, and there's an output. The public might not be happy, but they participated. Stakeholder engagement. From day one or before day one, you're thinking about every single voice that needs to be part of this process, and you're bringing them into that process, and they're having a part of the process, and they're feeling at the end of the process that they may not be happy with the output, but at least their opinions were considered, listened to, and taken into consideration. So when we talk about stakeholder engagement up here, this is what we're talking about. When we talk about a website, we're talking about some public notification. So just keep those in mind when you're communicating and sharing information, like what are you trying to do in your community, and where are you going to land? So let's get into it. The MS4 permit, you'll notice that word minimum standards, right? This is what you have to do to get points. You have certain amount of points, 1 point for a social media post, up to 3 points total, which is almost the same as 3 points for an art mural that you can paint on stormwater pollution, right? The capacity, funding, effort is way different for those two things, but they're worth some kind of point system. So when you're thinking about your MS4 compliance, forget about the point system. Points don't matter. Think about, who do you want to reach? What message do you want to set? What is your goal? And what behaviors do you want to change? Because at the end of the day, if you create a true plan that has goals and outcomes, you're probably going to hit all of those points. But don't try to hit the points. Think about what your community needs first. So we're getting rid of the point system, and we're thinking about what we want to do in our communities. There's a lot of things on that list. You'll hit all of them. So let's get into understanding our audience. And Kendra and Lucia talked about this a little bit. The important thing when you're thinking about stakeholder engagement or any kind of public information that you're putting out there is narratives. Who's reading that? What kind of information are you putting out there? And when you're doing that, there are two things that you need to think about. One is values. So what do these people value? When you create narratives that are based on values, you're more likely to reach those people. Like, narratives are stories that people tell about their lives, and they experience things through narratives, right? So what are some narratives, or what are some values that you guys have? Just call them out. There's some out there. Do you care about the environment? Sustainability, right? So like, we all have values. They could be family, it could be money, it could be anything. But these are people in your community, they have different values. You're going to be in a room full of lots of values. So you're going to need to be thinking about those different values, right? And then there's also heuristics, how people make their decisions. Like, one of my personal heuristics is efficiency. Like, I really like efficiency. If it's not efficient, I get really frustrated. And so I live my life in that way. Other people, transparency is really important. One of the communities that we work with, that is the way that we're doing our work. Everything is transparent, everything is public. So when you're thinking about building these narratives and how people are, what they value and how they make decisions, that goes into all of this stakeholder engagement strategy or public outreach strategy. And this is all called humanistic communications or values-based communications. So thinking about that as you're going through your strategy, thinking about who's in your community, like Lucia said, and what you want to communicate with them. So how many people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? A couple? Awesome. So for those of you who are not, this is a 5-tier model. It's hierarchical needs of society, right? And so if you're at the bottom, you're currently concerned about your psychological needs. You'll be thinking food, water, shelter. And as you move up, you get to that self-fulfillment stage. And that's really where you can feel empowered and make a difference. And so when you're thinking about your community, you have to think about like where people are at on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how you can, if you're thinking about say a public meeting, for example, and you have it at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, and you're trying to get the public in there, they're not coming. You have it at 12 noon on a Saturday, and you have childcare, and you provide food, they're all coming. There's food, there's childcare, and it's family friendly. Now we're talking about engagement, okay? So just thinking about where people are at. If we're talking about scientific data, we can maybe talk to the people at the top, right? They're there, they're able to be at that spot. But the people that are worried about food and shelter, they're not thinking about water quality requirements. Okay, so just thinking about that in your outreach strategy. So tools, everybody loves tools, right? Tools are my favorite thing. We talked about some tools earlier that Kendra went through, so we'll go through as quickly as we can here, but most important is like word choice matters, right? Cat lady versus cat woman are two different things. So edit your stuff, read it, edit it, make sure that it's correct, because everyone else will read it and they will tell you. So just make sure you're thinking about that. Think about who's reading this information. Why is it important? Again, thinking about their values. Is there historical information? Did the community experience Hurricane Irene or Tropical Storm Ida and or a small flood recently? Well, those are all experiences that people have that you can use to communicate with them. They might have a certain feeling about that. They may have been flooded and have those emotions, and you're trying to connect with that. So understand those experiences that they have and use that to communicate with them. How is it relevant? And what, again, values, 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 know who you're talking to. So here's a tool that I got from grad school. It's about writing narratives, and really it's who you're talking to, right? So if you're talking to a scientist about flooding, scientific uncertainty might be the narrative that you're using, the language that you're using. These are called language determinants. Thanks. If you're talking to the media or a community group, you want to highlight certainty. That's going to resonate more with those people. If you're talking to a business, bottom line, right? What's the economic benefit? How is it going to benefit them? So again, when you're writing your narratives, use these different language determinants to communicate and thinking about how those words are used. Okay, so we talked about earlier, a requirement here is a municipal stormwater webpage. This is an anonymous webpage from a community in New Jersey. I just took a screenshot of it. Again, let's go back to that word, minimum. This is the minimum, okay? We can get all of our PDF links up and say, here's all the reports and ordinances that we've finalized, and here you go. Who's reading that? Who's clicking those links? Maybe the Environmental Commission, right? The general public's not reading that. So let's think about creative websites. Okay, this is called an ArcGIS story map. This is not for an MS4, but it's essentially the same functions here. You can take your GIS data, make it interactive. It's mobile friendly. You can put photos, text, anything on it, and someone can zoom into, they can put their address on there and they can zoom in and they can see, oh, we mapped all of our outfalls. There's one right by my house. Maybe I'll clean it out. This is a cool tool that you guys can really use in your communities to make it more interactive, accessible to people as well. You're giving information to them in an accessible way rather than a PDF webpage. So I just wanted to share that because it's a really cool tool that exists out there, and they're fun to make. Social media. This is, part of the point system. You can get some points for social media. If you have a full communications team in your municipality, great, use them. They know what they're doing. But just a couple of tips here. You don't have to be on every social media network, and you know your community best. You know where they are, what social media networks might be best for your community. I mean, on Facebook, they have the groups, the local groups, like I'm in the Mount Holly group. They are a phenomenal place to share information of what's going on in your town. Use that. Share it to your page, share it in that group. People will, that's really where you need to think about disseminating information. And just make sure you're trying to tell the story, you're using facts and creating a conversation on there. And then you can use free resources like Canva. Who has used Canva? It's the best thing that ever happened to social media managers. We use the thing every single day. There's a free version that I used for 10 years until like a year ago. So it has sized graphics, templates. You can create flyers, cards, PowerPoint presentations, videos, like everything. Go to Canva. It's in your browser. It's very easy to use. #1 tool. Press advisories and press releases. The media can be your friend. The media should be your friend. Build relationships with those reporters because they're going to come to you for the information on your community. What's going on? Use them when you're having events. Some of these events that we're talking about, put a press advisory out. Use them. Say, this is what's happening. This is where it's happening. This is when it's happening. This is who's going to be here. And this is what time you should show up. And they'll help put out that information out. So this just use the media to your advantage for reaching additional people within your community. Driving action. So whether it's an action alert or signage, again, part of that MS4 outreach, there's a lot of signage that happens and you can get points for. Be creative, stay trendy, be funny. It gets people's attention. These are just some ones that the Marie Kondo of storm drains is like is one of the better ones out there. These are things you can share on social media to engage your community as well. And let me tell you, the likeliness that someone's going to share a meme over like some text post about, I don't know, make sure you clean your storm drain, this is going to be viral, not that post. So just get creative with that. There's a lot of stuff out there too, so use it. And just a review before we get into funding. Kendra said this, I say it, go to the people, go to where they gather. Say it again, go to the people, go to where they gather. Go to the people, go to where they gather. That's so important. They're not going to travel all across the city. Unless your city's small and they can walk there, they're not coming. Like if it's a 20-minute commute, they're not coming. Go to them. The other, we talked about values, identifying who's in your community, who they are they Spanish speaking? These are all things that you have to know in order to really do engagement. Use free or low cost tools. You can do polling tools, Jamboard if you have some virtual stuff. There's like so many tools out there that are free that you can leverage for outreach. Outreach materials with targeted narratives. We talked about this, just you have to identify those. This work is not easy. Identifying narratives is not easy. It takes time, it takes capacity, it takes energy, it takes money. So you have to make that commitment to be able to do that if you really want to have that behavior change and public outreach. Leverage relationships with reporters, and for God's sakes, provide food at meetings, please. It'll get people there. So with that, I will turn it over to Lee.
Y'all have heard from the best, and now you have me. So my name is Lee Clark. I am the program manager for New Jersey Futures Funding Navigator. And as you've heard so far, the importance of communication and community engagement to make it as inclusive as possible, to make it as informative as possible, and to make it as efficient as possible. But today, you and I are going to talk about a different kind of language, the language of money, paying for all of this. How do you do this? And a lot of the communication and engagement that I do with municipalities is either with the general public, with stakeholders, that could be businesses, organizations, and it can also be mostly government and elected officials. So that's a lot of the folks that I talk to. And yes, I see you right there, Mayor. So as we go through this, let's learn more about the Funding Navigator. Now, I'm going to talk about a bit of how we do our process and then kind of go over, well, not kind of, I will go over the state and federal funding that is available for stormwater management and stormwater improvement projects, something that we should be communicating to elected officials, to their constituents, so they understand where these funds are coming from, how long they have them until they dry up, and the importance that it will have in keeping their tax rates as low as possible, because that's what we want to try to avoid. The tax burn on the constituents and residents in order to fund and improve stormwater municipalities. So first, we recruit utilities servicing under-resourced communities. We want to make sure we're targeting the communities most in need, the small to medium-sized utilities, and those that are overburdened. With so much of the funding coming from the federal government, we want to make sure as much of this funding is coming to where it is needed the most. And as y'all know, New Jersey has some of the oldest water infrastructure in the nation. We want to provide consultation water infrastructure projects to seek and secure funds. We want to match utilities with technical assistance and professional service providers. You work with the funding navigator, we'll get you connected to some of the best consultants that money has to buy. And I'm not just saying that because we're grant funded to provide free services, all right? Yes, this is a little bit of a pitch, I'm sorry. And then finally, support water systems in completing application requirements for funding for state and federal programs. One of the biggest needs that we've identified is many utilities, because of their lacking in staff capacity or lacking of knowledge, because many of them have never gone through the SRF process. And yes, I will explain what SRF is, because I know many people don't know acronyms like that. Their knowledge of getting the application started from beginning to end is usually the biggest challenge. Also covering the upfront costs that it takes to get their application started, right? There are engineering fees, planning fees, legal fees. We want to be able to provide technical assistance to help with as much of that as possible for our most overburdened communities that we're working with. So what does our process look like? How does our engagement look? Because we want to make sure that we're getting everyone on the same page, that everyone understands what we're doing, and that there's no surprises down the rabbit hole that we call the SRF process. Many of the times we do screening calls, right? We want to make sure that the municipalities that we are working with are indeed eligible, that they are within the purview and the scope of work that we are handling. From there, we do what is called an LOI, or a letter of intent. It's been a long day. Where we outline the next steps between that and the service agreement that we would like them to sign in order to make it nice and legal. But usually this could be anything from providing a gap analysis to funding a feasibility study for rate payers, or anything like that that would be required by the SRF application. Gap analysis. We bring usually Moonshot or some engineer out to the wastewater or drinking water facility, and we analyze, where are you weak? Where are you strong, right? We put together that plan to help you figure out for the next 10 years or so what you should be prioritizing the funds for, because many municipalities don't have a gap analysis. They don't know where their utilities are weak and strong, and we help them with that technical assistance. And then we put together what's called a technical assistance work plan. We take the analysis, we put it before the board, whether it's council or the utility board. We present how we're going to get from point A to point Z and hold your hand all the way through. The service agreement, because let's face it, the best relationships are signed legally. And then the technical assistance implementation, where we carry it out so we can get you to the finish line for that application. And then we close out, because I'm always interested in feedback. How is my service to your town? How are our consultants? I'm always looking to make the program better. Now, does anyone here know how the water bank works? Has anyone ever heard of the water bank? Okay, this is exactly what I expected. Just to give a quick overview of how this actually works, and I'm not going to go into the technicalities of this, but essentially the funds come from the federal government. Currently, we are seeing funds through the ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. There's also other funds through EPA that's more loose, but it all comes through the EPA, and then it's divvied to what is called the water bank. The water bank is a combination between NJDEP and the I-Bank. The NJDEP sets the policy, the I-Bank handles the interest rates and makes sure that your municipality is creditworthy enough to carry the loan and determine what interest rate you'll be given. Most of the funding, if not all of it, through the water bank is dealt through a form of a loan. But for our most overburdened communities, they can get what's called principal forgiveness, which is a forgivable loan that can be converted into a grant, so they won't carry any debt on that end. However, the interest rates that you'll get through through the water bank are far lower than what you'll get on the bond market. And to give you an idea of this, the I-Bank usually matches the interest rate on the bond market. Combining out the 0% interest rate of the NJDEP, you're always guaranteed a lower interest rate going through the water bank than you are in the open bond market, especially if you divvy this out over a year of 25, 30 years, right? So it's always a lower rate you'll get from the water bank than you can always get on the bond market. This is then repaid back into the water bank, and then the funds are recirculated for the next cycle that would have to come. This is done every year through an IUP, which is called the intended use plan. Right now, we're looking at the proposed intended use plan for 2025, which is what most of this funding that I'm going to be showing is based off of. And I'm not going to take too much more time because I know this can get wonky. But as we're talking about stormwater, right? We're looking at the CWSRF, which is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the proposed 2025 plan, right? So eligible projects include construction, expansion, or replacement of stormwater management systems, including the following. Right all here. Could I read them down the list? I can, but I feel that you can all read this. This is information that's very important to communicate to your communities, especially to your elected officials and your government officials that are always looking for new sources of funding for their capital projects. And in this case, we're talking about stormwater management and stormwater improvements. This tends to be information that many people don't really know about. We talk about the planning of stormwater implementation many of the times, but we never talk about what's eligible for the state and federal funding. Now, on the state level, I'm going to focus on two funding packages particular because you are stormwater people and you don't need to know much about brownfields right now, or maybe you do. Come talk to me if you want to. But right now, the funding packages are the sewer overflow and stormwater reuse grant and program loans, and then the stormwater resilience grant, which is mostly, if not all, ARPA funds. We're just going to take a quick glance of understanding, overall purpose, principal forgiveness, and the rates, and then project eligibility. Now, this ugly picture right here is a great comparison of potential principal forgiveness, how the interest rates are compared to DEP and iBank, which is the split share, and then what is the capital cap for applicant and overall available funding. Now, what we want to focus on, is the overflow and stormwater grants and the stormwater resilience. As you can see with the overflow, you're eligible for up to 20% principal forgiveness if your community is a qualifier for this. Because remember, only the most overburdened communities can really get the principal forgiveness, which is a forgivable loan that is converted into a grant. For stormwater resilience, it's up to an 80% principal forgiveness. Now, there is no cap for the stormwater resilience grants, but it is only available up to $10 million. So there is a cap, but how that's divvied out to all the different applicants, that varies right there. And then when we look at the OSG grants, it's $2 million available, but also a $2 million cap. So there's not as much funds available. However, that's why it's so important to get as much of this information out so the funds can be allocated in the most appropriate and efficient way possible while the funds are still there. Because remember, the funds being passed down to the federal grant government in the form of ARPA and bill are not forever. We have to use them. And so here's just something y'all can read. But essentially for the OSG program, this program intends to address infrastructure needs to combine sewer overflows, sanitary sewer flows, but stormwater management. That is the word of today, stormwater management. So it's focusing on communities that are financially distressed communities, implementing a long-term control plan for CSOs or SSOs, or requesting funds for projects included on the CWSRF IUP, which I listed out already earlier. And then only capital improvement projects are eligible, included on this planning. So it has to be shovel ready, and a lot of that will depend on whether your project is ready to go or not. Otherwise, funding can be rolled over into the next financial year, as you will see in later slides. But then there's also the stormwater resilience program, which is intended more for green infrastructure investment and sustainability, right? So mitigating localized flooding and enhance the ecological health of waterways is really the intent of this pot of money, which I feel a lot of folks at this conference are trying to accomplish. Now, I did promise y'all federal funding. This is technical assistance federal funding through the EPA. They do offer, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, free engineering for drinking water systems, wastewater systems, and stormwater services. So if you find yourself in a predicament where you do need an engineer, but you can't quite afford it for technical assistance purposes, right here's a program that you can access and apply to in order to help ease some of those burdens. And then as we get away, or this is still technical assistance, here are all of the water TA programs that are available currently through the EPA. And again, it's very important that we communicate much of this, if not all of it, preferably all of it, to our communities and to our elected officials so they can go for this grant money or low interest loans. And then finally, getting away from technical assistance a little bit, more EPA federal grant money that is available. The USDA's Watershed and Flood Prevention Options program, And then also, and this is a year-round rolling application process. So there's no deadline on this, but you want to apply as soon as possible. And then also FEMA, the fiscal year 2023 funding opportunities for hazard mitigation assistance grants. As you can see, for this grant cycle, $800 million is available for flood mitigation assistance, and then $1 billion is available to the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, which is BRIC. Grant program. Now, application periods is open from October 16th, 2023 to February 29th, 2024. So you got a couple days. So finally, this is the end of our story. If you have any questions or would like to work with us, that's me. If I'm busy or you can't reach me for some reason, Ben Jovic, that's him. But thank you for your time, and I'll give it back to them.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I'm going to ask for questions here in the room, and I am going to be repeating them. And then I'll be also monitoring the question and answer if there are questions from the Zoom world. So in the room, do we have a question for any of our panelists? Yes.
From the Watershed Association, thank you for all the panelists for just amazing discussion. I got some first question or there's a group of there's a huge like Latinx population in the northern portion of our watershed, so like Hackettstown, Byron, like that area, but they're not from one kind of part. It's like Dominican, people from Latin America. And so how would language work? Would you use, I know Castilian is not always kind of understood by most people, but what's another way to kind of like get them like a cross dialect? And then I think the second one is we also have some indigenous members of the community, so like Quechua and Maya are kind of spoken. And I don't know if you've kind of encountered that, but you would suggest.
So the question is about trying to communicate with a community that has diverse populations of Spanish speakers, and a separate question about working with Indigenous speakers. You can, I think that'll work. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, not camera, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So I've encountered this too. So just as a brief background, I am South American. Not only that, I'm Chilean, and Chilean Spanish, for those of you who don't know, is just really, really different from a lot of other countries. So I often find that I need to change a lot of words that I use that I thought was universal, but they're not. They're only Chilean. So what I have done and I've been very fortunate and it's been super helpful, has been to find a community member within that community that is either well-known or maybe works for an organization that you're already familiar with, and building rapport with them. I have found that genuinely just reaching out to an organization and asking them, hey, like, would you like to collaborate with this? I want assistance with such and so, this sort of translation. And I've found that these types of organizations are always like happy to help because, you know, they want more people reaching out to their communities. So that's the best thing that I can suggest, is to go and build relationships with organizations already based there. And if it's not an organization, it'll find out who those individuals are.
And they're very involved in that community. I think one of the barriers actually that they've had is the fact that not everybody reads. Some people come from more like oral cultures, and so I don't know if you've encountered that. That was kind of a question on their impact.
I'm just gonna
yeah,
repeat.
sure.
The question is about communities that rely on oral communication versus written communication, and any experience with that.
So first thing with that is you're going to have, well, to start with, in-person events, you know, with the at considerations that Dana mentioned. And another thing that was brought up to actually a partner organization is the use of Facebook Live too, as a sort of like hybrid for those events. So the people who cannot attend, because once again, as I mentioned, Latinos, we love Facebook. They love the Facebook Live. So they know how to utilize, a lot of them know how to utilize Facebook Live. So that is another just, a familiar entity that they'll use. So say if someone's not able to be there, they can videotape in, and then I have never used it, but I'm assuming you can probably record it. And there you have a video transcription. But yeah, things such as visuals, with just basic words that maybe say if one person can't read it, another person can, but using visuals, using videos, spoken word, those things I've found to be extremely, extremely helpful. Yep.
Yes, in the back.
Kind of follow up on that question. Is there sort of, I don't know if this is a question, but more basic Spanish words that multiple countries could use? Is there anything like that that you could use if you don't have the resources to translate it into multiple things? You have to do one Spanish translation. Is there resources?
Question is, can you simplify this? If you can only do one translation, are there words that are commonly used that you can focus on?
So just for clarification, I'm assuming you're referring to like a general environmental docket or communications. You just mean really in general.
Really, like, for example, you were talking about flood risks. So adjectives, for example, it's like most people are going to understand.
Yeah. So Google Translate, I hate. I don't like Google Translate. Another translation tool that I use, and that some of my other Spanish speaking friends who translate stuff back into English can also vouch for, is the use of DeepL Translate. That is very easily found online. They are way better than Google Translate because they'll be like AI and feed you back the translation, but at the bottom, they will pull examples of where this word was used in what context in both English and Spanish. So, I mean, a word like flooding, so inundación, most people are going to understand that. But when you get into things like runoff, I've encountered like 3 different words for the term runoff, but you'll probably be safe with the big overall terms. It's when you get into, yeah, I guess runoff and any other like specific like MS4 permit or something. MS4 permit, you wouldn't translate. You just keep that in English because that does not exist or like there's no New Jersey MS4 permit in Spanish. But yeah, the DeepL Translate I recommend for the general Spanish. And then there are a lot of great bilingual dictionaries out there as well, that are targeted mainly to kids, but it'll still be applicable to adult communication as well, because you are just trying to use the basic terms to begin with. So, yeah.
I have a question. You referenced some virtual tools, Kendra, you did, and Dana also, Jamboards, and just to the point of people maybe not being able to make it across town for a variety of reasons. Which one of those have you found to be effective, not effective? Thinking about surveys or frequently used Jamboards, a Facebook Live meeting.
I'll chime in. I feel like with Jamboards, I have the most success when I have like a repeat group, because the first time there seems to be some confusion with using them. But if it's people I'm seeing regularly, the Jamboard has been really useful. I'm much more of the, like, I go out to the people. So I don't rely on the digital tools as much, because my first and foremost is always to be out there and then to make the personal connections with the people that are highly connected with others. So I'll let Dana take the rest.
Sure. I also love Jamboard in a virtual setting. It's being discontinued at the end of the year. So
Okay, I gotta make
So Google has some suggested alternatives, and I think things that can be copied over into those accounts. I know it is very tragic. But for those of you who are not familiar with Jamboard, it's basically like a digital post-it note slide where you can give a link and anyone can add to it. I like to do different like stakeholder engagement feedback types of things, like put a question up there and everyone can put their Post-it note in, and then we can kind of group them together and come up with themes. It's really helpful. I also prefer in person. I think it's, if you can do the in-person meeting. I'm not a fan of hybrid. Because the people who would come in person don't come, and then they don't pay attention. So you might get a bigger attendance on a hybrid meeting, but you get a deeper engagement in person. So if you can do that, please do that.
I'm gonna chime in. I feel like I've had the most successful like digital campaigns when I've had like a personal connection advocate in the community. Like you need, even if you're digital, you still need somebody who's physically there saying, you should do this, we're gonna do this. So it might be, for us, we have a contact in Trenton at the East Trenton Collaborative. They're really helpful with that. If I didn't have her, I'd have to physically be pushing it. So there's always this physical component to being where the people are.
Yeah, and then just to add on the tools question, I really like Mentimeter for both in-person and digital. So you can do real-time polling and ask different kinds of questions, and the results can be in a lot of different formats. It can be like everyone can enter 1 or 2 or 3 words, and then it makes a word cloud. It can be a poll, or you can select multiple answers. It's a really cool like live polling to get the pulse on how someone's feeling, or just in general to get feedback. So I would recommend, there's a free version and there's a pretty low cost, fully accessible paid version. But we use that all the time, both internal and external.
I'm gonna jump in because
Yeah.
it's the Dana and Kendra show now. I also, oh my God, how could I just forget that? Oh, sorry.
Polling.
Thank you, Dana. I want to caution you, know your audience and if they've been heavily surveyed. Part of the reason I don't use surveys that much is I work largely in Trenton, and there have been generations of people who've been asked the same question of, do you use your green space? Would you make a rain garden? Would you like to do this? That people get angry with me. Like, what's the point of answering this? So even a survey, see if someone's already done a survey in the last few years, because that's really going to change your response and your buy-in.
Any other questions for our panelists? All right, well, thank you so much for coming, and feel free to come up afterwards and ask questions, and we'll be on to the next session. Thank you.
How did we do on time? Is it okay?